I just did a podcast episode, and so I switched my equipment over here to video, which is audio. It's easier. And this is just a good way to, you guys see me on shorts all the time. Sometimes I like to come and do a little bit longer than a short, but it's not part of the free non-duality series. This isn't. This little message is more like the kind of stuff that I share on podcast, what I'm sharing right now. But also it might help just if you watch our shorts. I'll explain. Because I've done podcasts in the last couple of days, my throat is not as strong as it could be. So let's just bear with me here we go. So I just want to define a few terms in the way that maybe me and Dan might define them for purposes of these shorts and different things that you see, posts. Is gaslighting, is just real quick, we both understand that there could be abusive situations where someone just hammers someone's reality and that's really abusive. And that's an exception to the kind of thing that we're talking about. Sometimes people just need to leave relationships or seek resources or do whatever they can to survive truthfully. And not everything is for inquiry, extreme situations. But if you put that aside on that topic, mostly gaslighting, how we mean it is, since we were early, kids, early age, we've had to hold back certain emotions. So we don't know that. They're buried. And then as science says, and you'll see in your body, those buried emotions create suffering, but it's a false identity. See, so if we hold anger back, we have to be good, have to be peaceful. If we hold hurt back, we have to be strong. We can't show that. Whatever that falseness is protects us from what's buried, mostly, see. So our identities are protecting us from what we've buried. That protects us from expressing those things, is to believe deficiency stories and identities that aren't really what we are, because we can't be our authentic self. We can't feel and express what's true. So we're gaslighting ourselves, to say. In other words, every moment of our lives, we don't even know how we really feel about situations until we get to the buried emotions. Anger repressors are angry. Hurt repressors are hurt, predominantly. So that's the gaslight, see? Because anger repressors don't show up angry. They're gaslighting themselves and others, but they can't own it. That's part of the repression, and same with hurt repressors and sadness repressors. And then we're constantly doing it in other ways. Like shame, we've learned and seen directly that shame protects us from what we've buried, the emotions. And so shame is a way of just distracting us. It's so innocent, and guilt even, from actually feeling and expressing what's true to the people that we love. So we stop gaslighting ourselves and other people when we just being authentic. Because we're processing or have processed the emotions that are buried that created that falseness. So there you go. And then narcissism is, there's the definition of how we might look at it or talk about it. Narcissism is just anything that in consciousness that we weaponize is pointing to the core fear. So gaslighting is pointing to the core fear of owning what we've buried. And so we gaslight ourselves. But narcissism is too, because it's just this hot topic. And when we see it in people, it touches a button, no matter what type it is. But it touches the button within us. See, it's a shadow. Because if you do repression and trauma work, you know that humans are run, just like evolutionary science says, on fitness payoffs. But what we call them here are utilities. So basically, unconsciously, it's all about stay safe, get love, hold your emotions back, identify with false stuff. And so, that in and of itself is narcissistic, to go around in relationship with each other and essentially be manipulating each other to believe stories that aren't true and identities that aren't true, that are there so that we don't have to feel what we've buried. And that can be really narcissistic. Even people who appear very kind and loving and peaceful can be truly coming from a very narcissistic place from repression. But we don't always see it that way in ourselves, for sure. and in even some others. But when you do the repression work, you see it in everyone and yourself fully. That stay safe, get love conditioning that runs it all. And that's how you can end the suffering, though. To fully own, there's no narcissist here, just like there's no ego, but that points to those parts of ourselves that we don't want to go to. But that's the freedom. For sure, that's the freedom. And so the narcissism word points to this greatest freedom if we'll just stop shadowing and start processing. Just like gaslighting. But if it's always about the other people, if the source of our problems are outside of ourselves, then it's more suffering. It's just a recipe to focus on others for suffering. If there's one thing I've learned, it's so true. But here's the thing. With repression, if you can't feel and express what's true to others, then not focusing on others is just a way to stay safe and not be yourself. So I don't mean it that way, because anger or hurt repressors will say, okay, if I don't focus on others, then I'm just going to maybe process my triggers or my shadows. But see, that's the bypass, because it's to be authentic. We don't want to use, first of all, spirituality to just process triggers and stay safe from what's buried. That's not getting to the root. And it's a bypass. But if you do the right inquiry, you start to feel into what's actually true for you. And that's something totally different. It's not just processing triggers or coming back to awareness. You're actually being yourself in the midst of that awakening. There's an authenticity that's coming forward that you can trust. If you see it, you'll trust it. Your system will keep coming back to, no, I got to stay safe and get love. But you can trust the authenticity, though, because it's you. And it comes when the suffering starts to go away more and more. Empowerment, that there are qualities to embodied presence. There's power, vulnerability, of course, peace. But we have to be careful with any of those qualities, or compassion, because they can also be fake versions of those. I was just talking about that on podcast, so I wanted to come and talk about it briefly. We can use compassion just to stay safe and not know we're doing it, or vulnerability if we have repression. That's the gaslighting ourselves and others. It's so subtle, but it's a source of suffering that we don't see it. Like, I can tell you the subtlety of it is this example I just gave on the podcast that's coming up called, I have to remember the name that I called it. Darn it. Oh, I think it's Peace Sells and Everyone's Buying. Or I also did another one. But anyway, so it was after a conversation that was heated with me and Chester. We were arguing a bit. And as I drove away, I've told this story before here. I texted him and said, "Are you okay?" Yeah, you guys saw a short on that, right? And you would think that's nothing. Like, so what? You just ask him if he's okay. But see, you can get away with that unconsciousness if you don't if you don't process the unconscious. Because in that moment, I knew that had nothing to do with him. That's the fake compassion. It's not fake. It's just self-protective compassion. Because when you're embodied more, when you're more conscious, you don't just do that to test out someone's emotional experience so you can make sure that you're safe. because you don't want to express your own emotions fully yet. So anything can be fake or used from trauma. But the real qualities, see, if you do the work, there are real qualities that show up. You'll see it, like power. But that isn't fake either, because even that can be fake when it's coming from like just hurt repression, when somebody's getting angry a lot. But it's not powerful. It's just angry. And they're identified with it. Or an anger repressor coming out of repression who still has to be identified with it when they're angry for just a little bit. Right? It's all okay. But what are the real qualities of embodied awareness? We should talk about those. And then I'll just let you go here. As far as I can tell in my experience, I just named them, but it's power. It's just not fake power, or like control, which is not power. And that's something that you have to embody. Just talk about that quality for a second. Like when we have repression and trauma, we control ourselves, right? Repression, hold myself back. And then we definitely control others. So people, you guys out there, when you have repression, when you have anger or hurt repression, you're trying to control others. And there's manipulation there. I know you don't want to hear it, and some of you won't own it, but it's there. And I could show it to you if you came into inquiry, and if your partner came. I'm telling you, just own it. If you think it's your partner, just do your work, because that's how we stay safe. Look, I've been in a relationship where someone was in a really bad situation emotionally, and they shadowed everything onto me during that time. I mean, everything you can imagine. Like high level BPD type stuff. And what we need is our resources online when we're in those relationships. We need our authenticity for boundary setting and other reasons. But see, I didn't understand that until I came out of anger repression, that I had just been trying to control myself first by holding anger back. But then by doing that, I had to do in so many subtle and unconscious ways, try to control others. And that's the thing that anger repressors won't own. They can't until they do deeper somatic work. So they don't see how they're contributing. They're creating the suffering in their relationships. And hurt repressors don't either, because that's the whole point of it, is that you can't see it being unconscious. It's just then safer to think, oh, it's them, or it's just not what it really is. It's the repression. It's just something else, We're scapegoating, we're shadowing out, we're getting triggered. Ownership is incredibly difficult until we really embody these true qualities of awareness. And power is one of them, but you have to move through that mechanism of self-control around emotions. There's control. That's not power. And then when you begin to express all your emotions through deep work, there's still going to be this, you'll see it, where it's like you're still afraid of some of them, and it'll come out as like controlling. It's so natural, you'll see it. But you have to experience that to get angry and then want someone to change and just realize how futile it is and really experience the true surrender in that. But through the repression work, not through holding anger back and trying to control and get someone else not to be angry and all that. But the quality of power or strength is natural. If it's authentic, it feels natural. It's not mean. That's mean and are abusive. That's coming from repression. So it might be perceived that way. When people are coming out of repression, especially anger repression, and when they first start, they'll think that other people, or before that, they'll think that other people are very controlling and abusive. It's a shadow. See, so anger repressors have to be careful, I'm telling you, with their shadows, because we just shadow out all of our power and our strength and our anger out there, and then we're disempowered. And we're the ones that internally are controlling ourselves. And other people are doing it too to themselves, but we don't really have any business, anyone in repression, talking about other people. I'm telling you, until you can see how much you're controlling yourself, I would just say, do your own work, seriously. Then you'll see the power that's there. It's beautiful, but it's not mean. And so the meanness comes because we're still afraid. It's still the insecurity, the fear of being ourselves. I went through that with Chester. Is like, I could express anger, so it's like, God damn it, do it this way. I had to experience that and then fail at it. Surrendering then inevitably to what is. That's just has to happen. If you've never had that experience as with a repression, I mean, how else do you move from I'm an angry asshole right now to to I can finally beat myself? So that the meanness or the control is not even there. That was internal control with anger repression, holding myself back. And then I have to experience expressing that outwardly. And then there's the embodiment of the power for an anger repressor. But anger repressors don't want to go through the part about expressing it. That's their fear. Hurt repressors don't want to go through the part about expressing hurt. That's their fear, one of their biggest ones. Sadness repressors, same. And shame is how we don't have to do any of that. Right? For a while, just feel ashamed. Well, okay, so the quality of power, I don't want to keep belaboring that, but it's good to talk about, because I don't talk about affirmative things with inquiry, because I'm kind of like the school of Madhyamaka Buddhism. That philosophy is like, don't assert the truth. Just refute when someone else lands there, because that's not freedom, to just land on something and believe something and suffer. And my freedom has just not, it's not landing. And when I land, I process, because that's suffering. Landing is just believing something that isn't true. And then you can't have those qualities of authentic power. Okay, I'll just go through the other ones. Love. That's another thing. We hold love back. But we have to, because we hold anger back, or hurt, or sadness. And so love is actually naturally held back. But that comes online, the authentic love. That can be fake or used from trauma. It's just a trauma response. It's needing love. The love thing gets masquerades as needing love, right? When we're unconscious. We can't help it. We always need it outside ourselves, whatever it is, when we're unconscious. But love, and then that's not the authentic quality of love for us yet. So we have to do work with that. The fact of holding ourselves back, because we are love. That's an inherent quality. It's not mind. This isn't mind stuff. This is energetic. This is direct experience when you embody presence. And joy, of course, it's natural, but we don't want to get hooked up in the idea that it's a feeling that you have to have. Of course, that's not it. That's still avoidance of something that's buried, trying to chase a feeling. But a natural joy just comes from the authenticity. You know, it's not the smile that I had on it every day in high school, as I just shared on the podcast. I had a smile plastered on my face every day in high school. Even my art teacher told my father, it was a small town, but Scott smiles all the time, it seems. Every time I see him. He must be really happy. And my dad didn't know that I was terrified. So I don't know what he said, but that stuck with me, that so is that joy? No. And then it felt later too scary to experience real joy. As long as I had anger repression, it just did. So I didn't know what real joy was. So yeah, that's another thing that has to be authentic, a quality. We can't chase it as a state. It's not going to happen. It only comes through, for me it came through, only the authenticity of going to, it's like the joy is right there with the anger buried, or the hurt that's buried, the sadness. But it's actually just authenticity. There's a lightness, joy. That's a quality. Vulnerability, that can be fake. Because Well, you've heard me talk about it. It's not fake. It's just, it can be a trauma response, or it can be, it's really coming from that. So it's like, like, I don't feel like I'm being heard. That kind of thing. That sometimes comes from anger and other repressors. I used to do it all the time. I'm not being heard or seen here. It feels very authentic and vulnerable at first, until you do repression work, and then you go, well, of course I'm not being heard because I can't get angry. It's so simple. It's like, well, of course I've held myself back my whole life. Of course I'm going to go around and feel like I can't be heard. I felt like that since I was a kid. If I'm an anger repressor, or not seen, or afraid to be seen. But you don't see these things. These are the real qualities of what we are until you do that work. Until then, we protect ourselves with that, and we can't really be vulnerable, even though we think we are being, and asking the other person to hear us. That this might seem vulnerable, but people are just not going to hear us or see us. That's the reality. And when we align with reality, we align with the reality of our lives. We align with our authenticity. So it's like Chester, when I had anger repression, he would be on the phone a lot because he would regulate his system that way. And it would just be, like people would do, which I don't do this. I have my own things, but he would just mindlessly surf social media. So then it'd be like, well, it'd be nice if we could just like hang out, So I needed to be seen or something, or pay attention, or let's bond or connect. It's like, that seems reasonable. That until I saw, well, no, he's not supposed to pay attention or see me or anything like that if he's not. And when I was a kid, I just couldn't express anger and hurt in those moments, And once I processed all that, it was like, okay, well, he's just on his phone, of course. Yeah. What? He's on his phone. That's it. Nothing else there. Oh, and he's not paying attention to me. But then it doesn't hurt. It's not painful. It's not suffering. I was talking to someone who was saying that to me. She was like saying, I'm not heard. And I could feel the suffering in her voice. And I said, you know what? I'm not either. But I don't think I'm suffering. I just don't think I'm heard. So it makes me just want to communicate more. And I'm hoping that you would communicate with me more if you're not being heard. But she couldn't because she had emotional repression. So it's like asking somebody to do something they can't do. And so she just remained unheard for a little while. But then we got to the repression, and she saw, well, yeah, of course I'm not being heard because I can't express what's true for me. I just didn't know it was coming from me, she said. I said, I did, but I don't want to tell you that because it feels like a gaslight when you're saying you're not heard. If I would have said, well, you're just doing it to yourself, you would have said, well, now you're not hearing me. And I was like, well, I know. That's why I didn't say it. That's why I don't say that. And so these days, if somebody's says that they're not being heard, I'll say, well, I'll just come back tomorrow. Maybe we can hear each other better, because I don't think I'm being heard either, but it's not a problem. It just feels like we need to communicate better, really. And it feels like I can come back tomorrow and try it better, and you could too, couldn't we? If we love each other enough to give this a try. Can't space or a boundary be part of this relationship? Like, that seems pretty fucking sane. But how do you do that with repression? So, vulnerability. I don't know. That's tied up there with repression. Because I used to think just kind of being with what is was vulnerable. If I'm with somebody who's, for example, annoying or something, just be with that. And then I learned that I don't have to be with that. But the way I used to do it with anger repression would be a trigger or something. You know, if somebody was like a trigger or something, so I don't know, you know what it's like. And then you're just like, well, I'm going to go away from that person. And then with me, with chronic pain, I discovered, no, I fucking hate that person. I'm angry at that person. That's why I'm going away. But I wasn't conscious of it. So how can there be vulnerability in that? I just did not know that for anger repressors, you have to come out of repression for true vulnerability. That's going to hurt some people listening, I know, but sometimes we have to hear that because we're suffering in relationship and we might think we're being vulnerable. But if we're suffering, we're not, because we're still holding ourselves back in some way, and then we're not showing ourselves fully. And that's suffering. That's authenticity too, but vulnerability touches those deep parts of us and also the parts that are really, really soft. But how does an anger repressor even touch that? Or any hurt repressor certainly can't. That to me is a given on vulnerability. Like a hurt repressor, sadness repressor, my heart goes out to you because you can't touch that. But some of us anger repressors can, and we do it sometimes as a shield or a weapon, but sometimes we touch it. If you do your work, we all touch it, the real quality of vulnerability, no matter what repression we have, because we all meet in the same place, the real quality of that, which is not holding ourselves back, whatever that is. And it could be anger. And that's the shocker for me, that I would do anger repression work and I would wake up the next morning and cry for an hour. And it was so real, like unmistakably real. This is the kind of crying and vulnerability I'd never felt before. And I never did any inquiry on vulnerability the night before. It's just anger repression work. We all meet there some way because we're dealing with fear. And that's the enemy of vulnerability, isn't it? Or unless you could just be vulnerable about the fear. Another quality is peace, but I just did a podcast on peace cells and everyone's buy-in. It says when we have hurt, anger, or sadness, or all that repressed, then we're going to be seeking peace as a trauma response. And therefore, we're not going to have sustainable embodied peace in relationship, which the real peace is the embodied freedom. It's not the initial awakening or moments of peace or peacemaking or nonviolentness or any of that. Ultimately, that peace comes when we own all the parts of ourselves that are creating suffering. That's the non-peace, creating that suffering. And so, again, peace can be a bypass. But if it's authentic, it's there because we've met all the parts of ourselves. And wisdom, but that can be usurped by the knowledge thing. You know, I mean, even people hear me talk because I say things and they think, well, maybe you're in your head. And I'm like, well, maybe. But these are insights, and there's a difference between insight and just in your head. You know, and I don't need to convince that, though, at all. But there's real wisdom as an authentic quality of presence, as you guys know. And the wisdom that we can use in relationship too. One that is embodied and not just wise in the mind and still self-protective and not really authentic. I mean, real wisdom comes from owning the parts of yourself, because then you can see so much more in relationship. And compassion, of course, I said. To me, those are the qualities. There are more. But I'm glad to just say that, I just did some podcasts on that. So hopefully that you'll see the next season of podcasts. It'll start in July. And I'm going to have some guests. It's going to be great. But I talk about these subjects, including narcissism, is ego, own it, and is time on our side, which is like a totally new look at time and just how it helps us embody presence. Crazy. and some other good stuff I hope you guys will listen to. Keep coming to the Free Non-Duality on Sundays at 5 p.m. Pacific for several more weeks. I'm going to do first and second dimension pointing and practice for free, bypass free, cost free, Sundays at 5 p.m. Pacific. Then I've got, of course, a playlist on YouTube. That's on YouTube. I got a playlist on YouTube for that Free Non-Duality. You guys can just watch from beginning to end. And you can see how I would teach or point to non-duality, because I sit with you and point, just being present, seeing, just like any teacher. But also then you'll see a video come on the playlist that talks about the bypass in that. So you don't just get lulled into that. And then, yeah, there's much more. So tune into that. The podcast is coming back. Watch our shorts. We've got some cool stuff coming. Controversial, but just stuff that illuminates what we're going through doing this kind of work with people. So we have this really interesting experience to show you around how trauma and repression, it works on the spiritual path and how it works in relationship when you do this work. So stay tuned. YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. One more thing I have to mention, which is, and Oliver is just begging for my attention, so I have to go. Okay. So one more thing real quick, because I'm running out of juice. We have a beginner's do-it-yourself course for 3D repression work. Before you had to be in mentorship, but now you don't have to. There's a link to that course in the comments to this. So you'll see that for the first time. Thank you.